Welcome to Session 3 of Coping with COVID-19. My name is Gerry Vassar, President, CEO of Lakeside.
Hi, I'm Diane Wagenhals. I'm the Program Director for Lakeside Global Institute.
And this session is going to be about news, or maybe what we call news overload. Most of us are inquisitive, curious, wanting to know what's going on around us. And our normal way to do that is to tune into the news or our favorite podcast or the things that, but right now we're being flooded. We're being flooded with not just news, which usually has, well, here's a good thing that happened, and here are a few murders, and here's this, and here's that. And it usually is not all that great. But right now we're feeling and seeing news 24/7. We're trying to figure out what is relative to me. But a lot of it is talking about fear, talking about people around us that are dying. There's stories of people who are in a nursing home and lots of people are catching it and they feel very trapped. Or we're talking about very heartfelt stories of people who've sacrificed themselves as a nurse or a doctor and they've got it. Or some people that were even careless and got it. And all these interesting stories of people on ventilators, and it's just horrific. To see that every day. So as we look at that, and I know some people say to me, well, I can't watch it, or I can only take this much of it, or I'm absorbed by it 100%, I can't put it down. I'm wondering what is a healthy way to approach that? And I know it may be different from individual to individual, but maybe we can take a look at how does news actually like this affect us, particularly as we're seeing so much difficult news, and it feels like we're continuing to be in a cocoon of some kind where the news is all kind of bad. What do we do with that, Diana? What's happening to us as we see that? Give us some insight there.
When you were talking, I was thinking of a couple things. One is we're in a place, and some of us are in a place of almost desperation. We want answers. We're feeling if we got answers that would somehow help us to
Makes
cope.
the world right if I know the answer.
Yeah,
right.
It's back to steps of growth. Give me that understanding step fast.
Yeah.
Because maybe in the understanding I can make sense of it, and then I'll know what to do. But it can be like a vicious cycle because of the fear that generates. I'm thinking of how much I admire Bruce Perry, and he years ago wrote a brilliant article called "Marinated in Fear." And the image of being marinated in fear of what that's like. And it wasn't about this, obviously, but it was that idea that for children, but I think it's for everybody, that when fear is like bathing us, then we're almost drowning because we are on an overload with something that's going on. And so the fear just kind of bubbles up and we're feeling desperate. And if we think the news is going to calm us, that's probably a mistake. What we look for are leaders who seem to know what they're doing and are being mindful and careful and, the qualities of good leadership. We want leaders that'll help us with that. So we may be seeking the comfort of knowing somebody's in charge of this. Somebody's got this. So some of it is looking, again, the word desperation is what comes up, is, how often it's not just, oh, that's interesting. It's coming from a place of I have to know. I have to know what to do. I have to know how to protect myself, my family, fear about the future. There's so much of that we're linking it to, I need to be connected to the news, and I don't want to miss. And it also can be habitual. It becomes a habit. We get almost addicted if we don't watch ourselves to that overload of information that is actually causing us a lot of anxiety. So I think that's a way to understand it, and limiting it even by saying how many minutes a day you're going to give yourself, and being able to turn the TV off or put on a soap opera or something.
Yeah, so how do we know how much we can take? I mean, how much, if we are absorbing all of this, how do we know?
I think it's probably individual for each person.
Okay.
But if you are so compelled to reach for the TV as the first thing that you have to do in the morning when you get up, and then you're riveted for more than 10 or 15 minutes, I'd say you're starting to go into a zone of And each person could handle it differently. I think you almost watch your own sense of anxiety. Is it rising? The more you sit there, are you feeling more and more anxious? That's a good time to turn the TV off.
So really the level of anxiety could become a measure that
Yes.
maybe if you liken your being and your brain to a sponge and you're absorbing this all the time.
Funny you should say that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I love an image that Bruce Perry described in, he does this on his, he has some wonderful YouTubes right now that I highly recommend people just go to Child Trauma Academy and COVID-19, and you can see links to some very great, I think they're webinars, that give you all kinds of great information. But I remember going to a conference, and it made such sense to me when he described something called dosing, meaning what the dosage or the dose that we can take when it comes to information. That we have, if you think about your brain as a sponge, taking in information, if the information is liquid, if you have a sponge and you start to add liquid to it, there's a point when I don't care how good the liquid is, if the sponge is now saturated, what happens to the next bit of liquid that you pour in? It runs off. It can't be absorbed. And that's what's true about the information that comes in. At some point, you're so overloaded, you have to squeeze the sponge out, take a breath before you can start to add to it. And that's why sometimes when you're trying to cram, like people in school who try to cram for something for a test, they're now overdosing themselves with information, and it won't go in. So I think with just appreciating this idea, we have to do it in doses. The same is true with self-care through all of this. It's not like, okay, I'm going to take half an hour once a day, and I'm going to do things that help calm me down. That's not a good dosage. You may need it once an hour for 5 minutes. You may say, I need 10 times a day where I really literally separate myself from all of this and give myself a dose of something that helps calm me down and reduce my anxiety. Trying to do it, I'll reduce my anxiety in one big blow and now I'm good for the day, isn't going to work.
So it's interesting when people are saying to us, I keep having more and more anxiety. And now there's two components of that, and maybe others that we'll talk about. Being stuck in with family issues is one other issue. But the other issue is this news that we keep getting that's very devastating about thousands of people who are sick or who are dying.
Right.
On the one hand, and realizing that for maybe everybody's sponge is a little bit different as to what they can take and how they process things. Right. So there is a limit on what we can do. And then the balance of that is if I'm feeling anxious, the self-care piece is very, very important.
Very important.
And we'll talk more about that in another session. So I guess the rule of thumb here is when you have had your saturation point occur in the dosing, when you're feeling like I can't take any more, begin to practice a level of dosing that says, this is enough for me. And there's no problem with that.
No shame in that. No problem with that. That's really that's the way we are. That's the way we were created. We can also be on the lookout for the people we love to kind of think, are you being overdosed by information right now?
Right.
And you can even use this analogy. I think the sponge analogy is brilliant because it's something that just we can resonate. Most of us have had a sponge that's way too saturated, and I think if we know that's what we're doing, or we see someone else, to be able to say, how about if we take a break for a little bit? How about if we take a walk, or whatever it is that a break means?
Do something that's regulating.
Yeah,
right?
Especially for kids, too. They get overdosed.
Absolutely. It's important that we're relating to people in our families every day about this.
If my sponge is oversaturated and yours is, and we're sitting next to each other, it's going to be a mess. Yeah. Just got to clean that up.
Tough day. Well, thank you, Diane. I think it's really important that we understand the impact that the massive amount of news is having on us, and I think it does create all kinds of emotions and anxiety and fear and all kinds of issues. So it's important for us to think about how we not only allow ourselves to be exposed to that and we dose ourselves, but we also dose our family members and those around us and friends who are living in a bit of paranoia. So I think it's important that we understand that that's a positive way to deal with all the news. We don't want to ignore it, but we also want to be careful. So
I think we want to think, I'm going to switch metaphors, which may not be a good idea, but, what charges your battery and what depletes your battery too? Is that somewhere in here, it's like, how do we keep our battery, our emotional battery, charged up enough so we can handle whatever's coming in?
Right.
So, but I don't think you want to put a battery with a sponge. I don't know.
The two don't mix, but they're two good metaphors.
Yeah, there you go.
Diane, thank you so much. That'll be all that we'll talk about in this session. So we thank you for joining us today on Coping for COVID-19 regarding overload of news. And we'll see you next session. Thank you again.